There's an old story about a man named Damocles, a courtier of the king Dionysius II of Syracuse, and one day Damocles was doing his usual obsequious routine and rambling on and on to the king about how truly fortunate the king was to be wealthy and powerful and important, and he had every luxury at his disposal and was surrounded by magnificence all the time. He lived in a literal palace, for crying out loud. How could anyone be happier and more at peace than the king? In response, the king Dionysius offered to switch places with Damocles so that he could taste for himself that fortune firsthand. Damocles practically leapt at the opportunity to live in kingly luxury and eagerly accepted the king's offer. Damocles was set up on a golden throne that was upholstered with the finest coverings and exquisitely embroidered. He was given beautiful servants to wait on him, hand and foot. He was surrounded by silver and gold. A table was set before him with a feast of meat and the finest of wines, and the smell of extravagant incense and perfumes filled the air of his chamber. And Damocles thought to himself, this is it. How could anyone be happier or have like a greater peace in life than living amid this kind of richness and plenty? But in the middle of the room, above the throne where Damocles now sat, the king had servants suspend a huge, sharp sword hanging from the pommel by a single hair from a horse's tail, right above Damocles' head. And from that moment that Damocles laid eyes on the sword, he was transfixed on it. He couldn't take his eyes off of it. He was completely unable to enjoy any of the indulgences, the riches, the fine things that he was surrounded by. He sat suspended in anxiety, unwilling to make a move to reach out his hand to take and enjoy any of the goodness at his fingertips. He was paralyzed by the dread of this dangling sword above him until one day he begged the king to relieve him of his position on the throne. This week we think on rhythms of peace, and of course with that comes some reflecting on those patterns of anxiety and worry as well. Peace in the scriptures is not just the absence of conflict or anxiety, but it points to prosperity and safety, well-being, flourishing, health. Peace in the scriptures is authentically whole, healed relationships between people and God, and in all of creation. Peace in shalom in Hebrew, or ereme in Greek, is salvation, like fully experienced salvation, material as well as spiritual. It's a kind of wholeness and a completeness. So when Joshua builds an altar to the Lord, he makes it from an uncut whole stone. But the Hebrew word in that verse is actually, it is a shalom stone, a complete stone. Job is able to say that his tents are in shalom because he counted his flock and no animals are missing. So it is a complete flock. And it's this notion of completeness and wholeness and a derived well-being that the Psalms speak of when they say that the Lord will give strength to his people and the Lord will bless his people with peace. Or that one day all the wickedness of the world will disappear and the meek will inherit the land and delight themselves in the abundance of peace. The Old Testament looks forward to God bringing about this abundant wholeness through one it calls the Prince of Peace in Isaiah 9. And we of course believe that is Jesus who is the Prince of Peace that comes to establish this kind of restored wholeness to the universe. Jesus, who himself says in John 14, "My peace I give to you all." And so the apostles teach us that we have peace with God through Jesus. That's in Romans 5. Jesus gives us the gift of a restored wholeness between us and the one who made us. Paul says in Ephesians that Jesus himself is our peace. Jesus is our completeness. Paul instructs the church in Colossians, and I think he's speaking to us too, when he says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, for as members of one body we are called to live in peace." We're called to be peacemakers, those who, in the wholeness we've experienced in Jesus, partner with him in bringing and restoring wholeness to others and to the whole rest of the world around us. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, because they're the children of God." Take a few moments right now to consider, where do you desire to experience peace in your life? Where do you feel a sense of incompleteness or a need for the kind of wholeness and flourishing, the kind of peace that God offers and promises? What does that longing for peace feel like? Where and how do you desire to be a peacemaker and participate in bringing wholeness into relationships and into the world around you? Consider those questions around your desire for peace now. You're encouraged to pause the video for a moment, make any notes in your workbook that seem like they'd be important for you regarding these kinds of questions concerning your desire for peace. Now, when peace seems scarce, when wholeness and completeness seem lacking, what do we do? For most of us, we worry, right? We fret. We become anxious about what is not, about what we lack, about what's disordered or what's broken. And while Jesus seems to think that not a single one of us is going to add a day to our lives by worrying, we do it anyway. Perhaps your life feels a bit like the life of Damocles, and even though you're surrounded by good things, your eyes are fixated on the dangling sword of doom that maybe, just maybe, might, possibly, allegedly could come crashing down. And so, paralyzed by worry, you never take and embrace and enjoy the abundance and the well-being and the wholeness that God has already made available. Habits of worry are really sneaky because we so often develop patterns of fixating on that dangling sword when in reality there actually isn't one at all. Sometimes we act as though worry could function like a kind of magical spell that would stave off disaster or trouble. And if we worry, if we fret enough, we can avoid any hazard. Maybe you hold on to patterns of worry about the future because you think they might have the power to save you from something that seems even worse, namely a future full of regret. Or maybe you just allow worry and anxiety to serve as like a powerful motivator in your life. And after stressing and straining and fixating, you harness all that anxious energy and at the last possible moment use it to propel yourself forward in a decision or in an action. Any and all of that and more could amount to a resistance to peace in your life. So consider these questions. Where or in what ways are you resistant to peace? Where have you become convinced that fixing your eyes on a real or imagined dangling sword is better than taking and enjoying the King's abundance? In what ways are you holding on to worry as a tool for self-preservation? Where are you currently finding yourself resistant to the task of being a person of peace and a peacemaker? Give yourself a couple more minutes to prayerfully think through some of those questions regarding both desire and resistance to peace. Make the notes in your workbook where it seems helpful. And may the peace of Christ rule in your hearts.